The sun rose mercilessly over the Aswan quarries, painting the eastern sky in streaks of fire, a blazing promise of the day's impending furnace. Dust, fine as powdered ochre, hung in the air like an earthen mist, coating everything it touched: skin, clothing, tools, even settling in the lungs of those who labored there. For Kael, Senusret, and Ameny, 3 young men barely past their 20th Nile flood. This was the unrelenting rhythm of life, the metallic clang of bronze on granite, the persistent rasp of sand, the deep groan of stone yielding inch by painful inch to human determination. They had been friends since childhood, growing up in the same village downstream from the quarries, sons of stoneworkers who had dedicated their lives to the same backbreaking labor. Now they worked side by side, their bodies already beginning to show the telltale signs of their profession: calloused hands, muscles already corded and defined beneath sun-burnished skin, shoulders broad from years of lifting and hauling. But what set them apart from most of their fellow workers was the curiosity that burned as hot as the midday sun in their minds. Today's task was monumental, even by the grand standards of Pharaoh Khufu's ambitious building projects, freeing a colossal block of rose granite, destined, according to the whispers that traveled among the workers, for the burial chamber at the heart of the Great Pyramid itself. The block had been marked by the master quarryman the previous evening, its dimensions carefully measured and outlined with red ochre paint. It would need to be perfect. Kael, the most pragmatic and physically powerful of the 3, surveyed the hairline fissure the master had identified as their starting point. His broad chest expanded as he drew a deep breath, calculating the day's labor ahead. "The wood is ready," he announced, gesturing toward the neat pile of dried sycamore wedges nearby. Each had been carefully shaped by the carpenters, tapered and smooth, waiting for their crucial role in the day's work. "Let's hope the gods favor us with a clean split." Senusret, leaner and slightly taller than his friend, with intelligent eyes that often seemed to be looking beyond the immediate surroundings, stepped forward with a skeptical expression. "The gods may favor us," he said, picking up a heavy bronze chisel already worn from use. "But I favor careful placement and proper technique, though only whispered among trusted friends." Senusret had developed a somewhat heretical tendency to question the religious explanations that governed their society. Ameny, the youngest of the 3 by several months, slighter of build but nimble and quick-witted, nervously glanced around at his friend's casual blasphemy. Slighter of build but quick and dexterous, he was the son of a geometer who had fallen from favor, and he carried with him both literacy and caution, as well as an old measuring cord, kept in his family for generations. "Whether gods or technique," Ameny replied diplomatically, "we have a long day ahead. The overseer is watching." Indeed, the imposing figure of Meripta, chief quarry overseer, stood atop a nearby outcropping, his gaze sweeping across the dozens of teams laboring throughout the vast quarry. His presence alone was enough to quicken the pace of work. The 3 friends set to their task, beginning the painstaking process of creating a series of holes along the fissure line. Senusret and Ameny worked the chisels, striking them with precise, rhythmic blows from rounded dolerite hammerstones. The bronze, significantly softer than the granite they worked, dulled quickly and required constant attention. Kael followed behind them, meticulously pouring fine quartz sand into the path of their chisels. "More sand, Kael," Ameny called out after a particularly difficult section, sweat already streaming down his face and stinging his eyes despite the early hour. "The bite is weak here." Kael, ever watchful of the tool's efficacy, scooped another handful from the leather pouch at his waist. "It's the only way," he muttered, sprinkling the abrasive grains into the deepening groove. Sand against stone, grinding it down grain by grain. just as the Nile grinds away the banks each flood season. The sun climbed higher as they continued their work, tracing the line of the future split with a series of deep, evenly spaced holes. Other teams nearby worked at various stages of the quarrying process, some drilling, others already splitting, still others smoothing the faces of freed blocks or preparing them for transport. The air filled with the sounds of labor, the persistent tap-tap-tap of stone on metal, the grating of sand, the occasional shout of instruction or warning, the creaking of wooden levers and sledges. By midday, when the sun stood directly overhead and the granite beneath their feet had become hot enough to burn bare skin, they had completed their series of holes. Now came a crucial moment, the insertion of the wooden wedges. Each wedge had to fit snugly, neither too tight nor too loose. The three worked methodically down the line, tapping the wedges into place with careful, measured blows. Finally, the wedges were set. The three friends stepped back, retrieving waterskins from the shade of a rocky overhang where they had stored their meager midday meal, flatbread, a few dried figs, a small portion of salted fish. "Now comes the elegant part," Senusret said, his eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor as he uncorked his waterskin. Rather than drinking, he moved back to the row of wedges. With careful precision, he began to pour water over each one, ensuring they were thoroughly soaked. "The wood drinks the water," he explained, though his friends knew the process as well as he did. "It swells, pushing against the stone. The stone, already weakened by our holes, gives way along the line we've determined. No magic, no prayers, just the properties of materials acting exactly as they always do. That's how the river cuts through the land as well," Kael observed, watching the water darken the wood. "Water is patient. It finds the weakness and pushes, year after year, until even the hardest stone surrenders." They retreated to the shade, giving the wedges time to work their silent magic. The quarry grew quieter as other teams also paused for the midday meal and rest. In the relative privacy of their small shelter, they could speak more freely. Ameny broke his bread and passed portions to his friends. "My father, before his fall from grace, hinted that the temple priests guard esoteric knowledge about the properties of materials. He said quietly, knowledge they don't share with common workers like us." Senusret snorted. "Of course they claim secret knowledge. That's how they maintain their power. But look at us, we understand how wood swells with water. We know which stone is harder than another. We measure length and width to ensure the blocks will fit together perfectly. We calculate weight to know how many men must pull the sledges." He gestured toward their work site with a piece of bread. "That knowledge is real. It works every time. It doesn't change with the mood of a priest or the phases of the moon." "Keep your voice down," Ameny warned, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "The overseer has ears everywhere." Kael, typically the least philosophical of the three, surprised his friends by joining the conversation. "My grandfather helped build the step pyramid at Saqqara," he said. "He taught me about leverage, how a properly placed wooden beam can move a stone that would crush 10 men. He showed me how to judge the density of different stones by their color and grain, how to hear the sound of a solid block versus one with hidden cracks." He took a bite of fish. "The priests didn't teach him that. Experience did." "Exactly." Senusret leaned forward eagerly. "We've developed true knowledge through observation and testing. I've been keeping track of the weights of different types of stone based on their size. Granite is substantially heavier than limestone of the same volume. There's a consistent relationship there. A pattern." "You've been doing calculations?" Ameny asked, impressed but concerned. Without permission. Before Senusret could respond, a low, ominous groan emanated from the rock face where they had placed their wedges. All three froze, eyes widening, conversation instantly forgotten. The sound came again, louder this time, the profound complaint of stone that had rested unmoved for countless millennia, now being forced to separate along a line determined by human hands. They scrambled to their feet and rushed back to their work site. A thin crack had appeared, following the line of wedges almost perfectly. As they watched, the crack widened perceptibly, the swelling would exerting tremendous pressure against the granite. "It's working!" Kael exclaimed, his face brightening with the pride of craftsmanship. Other workers began to gather, drawn by the distinctive sound. Even Merimta himself descended from his vantage point to observe the critical moment. The three friends stood side by side, hearts pounding with anticipation and the peculiar fear that always accompanied these moments. Fear that the stone might split wrongly, ruining weeks of planning and preparation. With a sharp crack that echoed through the quarry like thunder, the massive section of granite sheared away from the main face. The separation was clean, almost perfect, following their carefully plotted line. A cheer went up from the assembled workers. Merimta nodded approvingly, the closest thing to praise most workers ever received from the stern overseer. "Well done," he said simply, before turning to check on other teams. "Begin dressing it immediately." The next phase of work began without delay. The newly freed block, though split as intended, had rough surfaces that would need to be smoothed and squared. This process, called dressing the stone, was as crucial as the splitting itself. The three friends, joined now by several other workers, set to work with different tools: copper saws fed with sand for the finer cuts, dolerite pounding stones for flattening the faces, reed brushes for clearing away debris. As they worked through the afternoon, their conversation resumed, though more circumspectly now that they were surrounded by others. "As I was saying earlier," Senusret murmured, rhythmically running a copper saw through a groove while an assistant poured sand and water into the cut. "There's a consistency to these properties. If a limestone block of a certain size requires 20 men to move it, a granite block of the same size needs nearly 30. It's heavier," Kael agreed, pounding steadily at the stone face with a rounded dolerite ball, creating a smooth, flat surface through countless repeated impacts. "Anyone who's carried both knows that." "Yes, but it's predictably heavier," Senusret insisted. "Always in the same proportion. Just as a full water skin always weighs the same as another full water skin of the same size. There's a measure to it, a property beyond just being heavy." Ameny, who was using a smaller stone to work on a corner of the block, looked thoughtful. "My father taught me how the royal cubit is based on the pharaoh's forearm, and how scribes use it to make accurate measurements for buildings. Perhaps this heaviness could also be measured with some standard." Senusret's eyes lit up. "Exactly. And not just heaviness, but also how much space something occupies, its volume. If we could establish standards for these properties." "You three. Less talking, more working." The sharp voice of a lesser overseer cut through their conversation. "That block needs to be ready for transport by tomorrow's dawn." They fell silent, focusing on their tasks with renewed diligence. But the ideas continued to percolate in their minds as the afternoon wore on into evening. By the time the workday ended, with the sun sinking toward the western desert in a blaze of orange and gold, the massive block had been transformed. Its faces were now smooth and square, its corners sharp and precise. It was ready for the next stage: transportation. The following morning arrived with a flurry of activity. The enormous dressed block, weighing approximately 50 tons, needed to be moved from the quarry floor to the Nile several miles away, where barges waited to transport it downstream to Giza. This was perhaps the most dangerous and difficult part of the entire process. First came the challenge of loading the block onto a wooden sledge sturdy enough to support its tremendous weight. Teams of workers positioned thick wooden levers beneath the stone, while others prepared mounds of sand as temporary supports. At a signal from Merimta, dozens of men heaved on the levers, raising the block just enough for another team to slide the massive sledge beneath it. Kael, Senusret, and Ameny were among those manning the levers, their muscles straining with the effort. When the block finally settled onto the sledge with a deep, resonant thud, a collective sigh of relief passed through the workers. Now comes the truly interesting part. Senusret whispered to his friends as they prepared for the next phase. Hundreds of men were organized into teams, grasping thick ropes of twisted papyrus fiber attached to the front of the sledge. Others carried water skins and baskets of sand. A separate team was responsible for laying wooden tracks in front of the sledge runners. Merimta stood at the head of the procession, raising his staff for silence. In the name of Pharaoh Khufu, living god and ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, we begin the journey, he proclaimed. May Khnum, shaper of men, guide our hands. May Hapi, Lord of the Nile, smooth our path. May Osiris grant strength to our backs. The traditional invocations complete. Merimta brought down his staff. The rope teams leaned forward in unison, taking up the slack. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with an initial jerking motion that settled into a slow, grinding progress, the sledge began to move. Kael, Senusret, and Ameny had been assigned to the water team. Their job was critical, to wet the sand in front of the sledge runners in precisely the right amount. Too little water, and the sand would remain loose and resistant. Too much, and it would become muddy and sticky. The perfect amount created a firm, slightly damp surface that dramatically reduced friction. As they worked, moving ahead of the sledge and carefully pouring water onto the sand path, Senusret explained his latest observations to his friends. Watch how it moves when the sand is properly wet, he said, gesturing toward the massive sledge that was now advancing steadily behind them. The water makes the sand grains lock together, almost like tiny stones in a mosaic. The surface becomes firmer, smoother. I've noticed that if we pour the water too far ahead, it dries out before the sledge arrives. Ameny added, the timing matters as much as the amount. Kael nodded. My father told me that in his youth, they used far more men to pull the blocks because they didn't understand about wetting the sand. Someone discovered it by accident when a water carrier spilled his load. And now we know, Senusret said with satisfaction. That's how true knowledge develops, through observation, through testing what works and what doesn't. The journey continued throughout the day, the massive stone block advancing slowly but steadily toward the Nile. The work was punctuated by chants and songs that helped the pullers maintain their rhythm. Overseers walked alongside, calling cadence and watching for any signs of danger. Progress was measured in cubits and fingers, each small distance a victory against the immense weight and the unyielding desert terrain. During a brief rest period, while one rope team substituted for another, the three friends found themselves at the edge of the procession. They watched as the relief team took up the strain, the chants beginning anew as the block resumed its journey. I've been thinking, Kael said, wiping sweat from his brow. Why do we build with stones so large? It takes hundreds of men and many days to move just one block. Wouldn't smaller stones serve as well, requiring less effort and risk? Ameny looked thoughtful. Perhaps it is to demonstrate the pharaoh's power, to show that he commands such vast resources of men and materials. Maybe. Senusret conceded. But the effort seems excessive even for that purpose. The planning, the coordination, the sheer human toll. He lowered his voice. And for what? A tomb that will be sealed once the pharaoh dies? Is immortality worth such cost? Careful. Ameny warned, glancing around nervously. Such questions border on blasphemy. Kael frowned, watching the massive block inch forward. It's not blasphemy to wonder about purpose. Look at that stone. 50 tons at least. We know from experience that 20 smaller blocks of 2 or 3 tons each would be far easier to transport and place. Yet we quarry these monsters, risking lives to move them. There must be a reason beyond mere display. The priests say the pyramids ensure the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. Ameny offered that their perfect form somehow channels divine power. Senusret looked skeptical. So they claim. But have you noticed how much of what the priests teach seems designed to keep us, the working people, in our place? They speak of cosmic harmony and divine order. And somehow that order always has them at the top and us hauling stone. Yet you 3 haul stone with uncommonly curious minds, said a deep voice behind them. They turned, startled and afraid, to find Merimta standing there. How long had the chief overseer been listening? His weathered face, lined by decades in the sun and wind, revealed nothing of his thoughts. His eyes, however, held an unexpected glimmer of interest. Chief Overseer. Ameny stammered, bowing his head. We meant no disrespect. Merimta raised a hand, cutting off the apology. I did not become chief overseer by being deaf to the questions that intelligent men ask. He gestured for them to follow him, leading them to a small rise that offered a view of the entire procession. Hundreds of men, the massive sledge with its precious cargo, the support teams, all moving as a single organism across the desert toward the distant glint of the Nile. You ask why we build with such massive stones? Merimta said, his voice carrying only to the 3 young men. A practical question. I asked it myself in my youth. The 3 exchanged surprised glances. The fearsome chief overseer had once been a questioner like themselves? And did you find an answer? Senusret ventured. Merimta was silent for a moment, watching the procession below. I have overseen the quarrying and transport of stone for 3 pharaohs, he said at last. I have seen the inner chambers of temples where common workers never set foot. I have heard the priests when they speak among themselves, not to the masses. He turned to face them directly. What I tell you now is not for other ears. You 3 show promise, not just as workers, but as thinkers. Such minds are valuable, but they must be tempered with wisdom. The 3 friends stood straighter, aware that something significant was happening. You speak of length, weight, volume. Merimta continued. Good. That is the foundation of practical knowledge. But there is deeper knowledge. He pointed toward the massive block they had helped quarry. You ask why so large? Because the pyramid is not merely a building. He lowered his voice further. It is a machine, a vessel, an engine of transformation. Senusret could not contain his curiosity. What kind of machine, Chief Overseer? A resurrection machine. Merimta replied, his eyes taking on an intensity that made even the skeptical Senusret pay close attention. Built with precise alignments, specific proportions, exact materials, all to channel the powers of earth and sky. He gestured toward the distant horizon, where the partly constructed Great Pyramid was just visible as a hazy shape against the northern sky. When Pharaoh completes his mortal journey, His Ka, his life force, requires a vessel and a path. The pyramid, angled perfectly to the cardinal points, captures the power of Ra and the energies that flow through the earth itself. Kael looked confused. But how does the size of the stones affect this machine? Consider a river dam. Merimta explained. Small stones allow water to seep through. Only massive blocks, fitted perfectly together, can withstand the pressure and channel the flow precisely. So too with the energies the pyramid must control. He drew a diagram in the sand with his staff. Within the heart of the pyramid, chambers and passages of specific dimensions create a pathway, not just for the pharaoh's body, but for his Ka. Through rituals and precise construction, the energies are concentrated, purified, directed. His staff traced the shape of a pathway from the pyramid up toward the sky. And then, the Ka ascends, not as a man, but as pure life force, joining the imperishable stars in the northern sky, those stars that never set, but circle eternally around the cosmic pole. There, Pharaoh sails the celestial Nile for eternity, becoming one with the gods themselves. He erased the diagram with a sweep of his staff. These great stones, quarried with such effort, transported with such precision, placed with such care, they are the conduits for that journey. Their mass, their solidity, their permanence anchor the monument through the millennia, ensuring the transformation continues. The three young men stared, first at Merimta, then at the colossal block inching its way across the desert, then toward the distant, hazy shape of the Great Pyramid. Suddenly, the backbreaking labor, the meticulous measurements, the precise angles, all of it clicked into place within a grander cosmic framework. Even Senusret, the most skeptical of the three, found himself nodding slowly. If one accepted the premise, the engineering followed logically. The scale of the task matched the scale of its purpose. A resurrection machine. Kael murmured, looking at the granite block with new eyes. To transform the pharaoh into a star. The mathematics, the measurements we make, they're not just practical, they're sacred. Ameny realized, his scribe's education helping him grasp the implications. It makes sense. Agreed Senusret, the mysteries of the priests suddenly seeming less like mere stories and more like the technical specifications for the universe's most ambitious engineering project. Merimta studied their faces, seeming satisfied with what he saw. The knowledge you three seek, about weight, density, volume, is valuable. Continue to observe, to measure, to understand. But remember that such knowledge serves a greater purpose. He pointed his staff at each of them in turn. You have potential beyond most. I will be watching your progress. With that, he turned and strode back toward the procession, shouting orders to adjust the ropes on the eastern side of the sledge. The three friends remained on the rise for a moment longer, watching the massive stone continue its journey toward the Nile, toward Giza, toward its destiny as part of the greatest resurrection machine ever constructed. Well, Senusret said at last, a new respect in his voice. It seems our measurements have more significance than I thought. And more significance than most workers will ever know. Ameny added, still processing the remarkable conversation. Kael straightened his shoulders, looking at the distant pyramid with fresh eyes. Come on, he said. We have a star to build. Together, they descended the rise, rejoining the great human engine that was moving a mountain one massive block at a time. The sun beat down, the sand shifted beneath their feet, and the work continued, transforming not just stone, but knowledge, belief, and perhaps, someday, a pharaoh into a god among the eternal stars. As dusk fell and the work teams prepared to secure the block for the night, Kael, Senusret, and Ameny found themselves standing together at the rear of the sledge. The western sky blazed with color, deep oranges and golds fading to purple and finally to the deep blue where the first evening stars were beginning to appear. Senusret looked up at those distant points of light. "Do you think it's true?" he asked quietly. "That the pyramid can transform a man into a star?" Ameny considered this. "My father once told me that the stars are the eyes of the gods, watching over us. Perhaps they are not just watching, but waiting for us to join them." Kael, practical as always, ran a hand along the smooth granite surface of the block they had helped quarry. "I know this stone is real," he said. "I know our knowledge of how to cut it, move it, and place it is real." He looked up at the stars appearing one by one in the deepening sky. "Whether Pharaoh becomes one of those lights, that, I suppose, we will never know." "Perhaps," Senusret said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That is the final measurement we cannot make." Behind them, Meripta called for the evening rituals to begin. The three friends turned from their contemplation of the heavens to join their fellow workers. Tomorrow would bring another day of labor, another opportunity to expand their understanding of the physical world, and perhaps, in some small way, to contribute to something that transcended mere stone and sweat, a bridge between earth and stars, built one massive block at a time. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, as they had for countless millennia before humans first looked up in wonder, and as they would for countless millennia after the last stone of the last pyramid had crumbled to dust. Below, three young men dreamed of weights and measures, of forces and materials, of the first tentative steps toward what would one day be called physics. And perhaps, somewhere in the northern sky, the immortal stars among which past pharaohs now journeyed looked down in approval at their successors, not just as rulers of Egypt, but as seekers of knowledge in a universe of mysteries.